Hello, friends, and welcome back to Ghouls Night In, the spooky chat show with your best ghoul friends. I'm Penny Snark,
And I'm Midge Munster.
and Midge, I have no reason for what I've brought today.
Great.
I I was just sitting there, and I was like, "What do I want to learn about?" And from inside the depths of my brain, a voice said, "Snakes."
Oh, well, there you go. I just encountered one in my backyard yesterday.
What?
So there's your reason. It's
There's
because
your
Midge saw a
reason.
snake.
There you go. It happened. Am I remembering correctly that you are generally a pro snake person?
Yeah, I am. I'm
Yeah.
good with snakes. We're good.
Yes. We good. Me too. I have always been a snake fan. I actually am a snake in Chinese astrology.
Thought you were
So
like, I actually identify as a
snake
snake.
in real
Okay.
life. Yeah, I don't know. So I don't know if I just like saw that on a placemat at a Chinese buffet and was like, snakes are cool. Or maybe I'm just into the danger noodles. But I have a very clear memory of being at the zoo as a kid and they were
Same.
like, who wants to pet the snake? And I was like, hell
Hell
yes,
yeah.
I do. I want to touch this snake. And I touched it and I was like 10 out of 10. Amazing experience. Touching snakes is great.
You left a Yelp review. You're like 5 stars. Very
Five
slippery.
stars.
Very cool.
Smooth and dry. But fear of snakes is actually one of the most common fears. I
Mhm.
think we did mention this back in our fear episode that we did. It's estimated that a third of US adults are afraid of snakes. Obviously, it's a much smaller percentage who have an actual phobia, but like amongst phobias, it is one of the more common ones.
Sure. I
Uh,
mean, it's kind of like a spider, right? I'm like, I don't want to be surprised by a snake.
Yes, this is true. I will say, like, I don't want, like, a snake to show up in my house when I wasn't
Right.
expecting it. Like, if someone brought a snake over, I'd be like, "Cool, welcome, snake." But an
Yeah.
unexpected one would not be great.
Right.
Uh, how did you feel when you saw a snake in your yard?
But
Was it
see,
an
that's what
unexpected snake? Was it a
it,
startling snake, or was it a, "Oh, hey, there's a little grass buddy"?
yeah, it was a little grass buddy. Yeah, like in the yard, I was fine. I was like,
Yes,
oh, because that's
this is
his
where you
domain.
live.
That's not,
Yep.
yeah, that's not my business. What you're doing out here. But I was actually a little like, because why I was in the yard is Taylor had thought that a bird's nest had fallen.
Mm.
And when I went out to look, it was actually baby bunnies in a
Oh.
like in their little hole. But so then I was like, okay, baby bunnies,
The
you're
snake's
all
like,
good.
"Oh,
And then I
no."
walked away. Penny, I will send you a photo of this snake. He's literally like upright and doing like, and I was like, oh, he'd be
Ooh.
looking like if that's a snack. But he was like a really tiny little garter snake, so I don't think he could have. I
No,
don't think he
I
could
don't
have
think you'd
eaten
be
baby
able
bunny if even if he
yeah.
wanted to.
Well, so snakes. We scientists do believe that the fear of snakes is evolutionary in nature because snakes are dangerous.
Because people
Um,
can die from them. Sure,
fun
makes
fact:
sense.
snakes can be dangerous. So people aren't born being afraid of snakes, but it is easier for a fear response to develop in your mind for snakes than like things that are not snakes. So I
There
did
are only two
there's
categories:
two
snakes
categories,
and not
snakes and not
snakes.
snakes. I looked up snake phobia in my book of phobias and manias previously mentioned.
Mm.
And she talks about a study in which primates in like a zoo lab environment who were not familiar with snakes didn't react with fear to like a fake snake, but when they showed them videos of other apes being afraid of snakes, they adopted the fear more quickly than when they were shown like videos of it being afraid by like a rat or something like
Mm.
that. So it is like kind of like within our DNA that our brains are like, this thing's dangerous.
Yeah.
But much like the other spooky critters we featured on the show, they might be a little less scary once you get to know them. So let's learn a little bit. So, if you're not familiar, a snake is like a long, scaly tube with a face on one end.
Way to make it sound not scary at all. Great job.
Right? JK. Snakes are part of the reptile family, and there are around 3,900 species of snakes. And because I was curious, I did look up the other animals that I talked about. And as they stack up, we got like 500 species of sharks, 1,400 of bat, and then of course moths were the ones who were like, "There's 160,000."
I was gonna
Um,
say nobody can take down moths.
Nobody can take down moths, but in general, there's a lot of different kinds of snakes.
Yeah.
Um, Antarctica is the only continent with no snakes, although there are islands like Ireland, Iceland, and New Zealand that do not have any native snakes. But otherwise, there's probably going to be snakes. A etymology fun fact that I really liked: the word snake comes from the same root word as sneak, which was
Sneaky snake.
snego, to crawl, to creep, and serpent, which comes from the French, comes from a totally different root word, serp, to creep. So when we were coming
Oh.
up with words about when we were like coming up with words, we were like, one thing about snakes,
They creep.
they're creeping and they're crawling.
They be creeping and
They
crawling,
be
yeah.
creeping and crawling, which they definitely are. So they go wiggling around. A pretty major defining feature of snakes is they have no legs.
So
But
so true, bestie.
so true. But what I learned while researching for this episode is there's not a lot of fossil evidence of snakes because snake skeletons are relatively delicate.
Mhm.
So there are gaps in our knowledge of how snakes kind of came to be. We know that they branched off from lizards at some point, and some snakes actually have like vestigial remnants of hind limbs. Um,
Mm.
there are pythons that actually develop like full hind buds, they called them, as embryos. But
Oh.
then there's like a mutation in their genetic code that stops them from developing any further. And as I was learning about this, Wikipedia just casually lets me know that this is called the Sonic Hedgehog gene. You're biologist, what are you doing over there? You can't just be naming things Sonic the Hedgehog.
This also has caused me to eat crow because I was going to say snakes aren't technically crawling because you have to have like hands and knees to crawl, but apparently they have some hind
Maybe
buds.
maybe
So
you got
maybe
some little
maybe
buds in there.
maybe at some point they were crawling. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. So there apparently is like disagreement about whether they think that snakes are more closely related to like burrowing lizards
Mm.
or like aquatic lizards, like aquatic dinosaurs. So there's potential for either of those to be true, but we just don't know at this point. The other wild thing that I learned is I feel like my instinct would be to say that like snakes have long tails because they're like a head with a tail. But in fact, most snakes physiologically have relatively small tails and they're actually a big neck.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because I don't think of that as being like their
Yeah.
tail. I
Yeah.
would I
You
would
think
say
of
they
it
have like a
as a
long
big neck,
body, a long
big
body.
body.
I think especially because like I grew up around a lot of like rattlesnakes. I think of
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the little end, like the little
No,
butt
that's
end
fair.
being the
Yeah,
tail.
that's fair.
Yeah.
See, I usually I do not live somewhere where there are I mean there are like garter snakes and stuff, but I don't see rattlesnakes. So I generally just think of like, oh, it's a face with a tail attached to it, which is not true. So now I know something.
Again, a super not scary way to describe something. Just a face with a really long tail.
I don't know what's scary about a face and a tail. I don't
When
think
that's exclusively what there is, a lot actually.
All right, all right. So, of course, I needed to find out what the biggest and smallest snakes are. Um,
Sure.
and this actually proved a little bit difficult. So, there's a lot of like reported sightings of huge, enormous snakes. Not a lot of confirmation about it. So, like, it's certainly possible that there are much larger snakes in the wild that we are not aware of.
Mhm.
But also, there are different ways to measure snakes. So it seems like, in general, the longest snake is the reticulated python. The longest ever measured in captivity was 32 feet long, which is a
Dang.
big snake.
That's a big boy.
And they tend to grow to a more manageable 26 feet long in the wild.
Oh, yeah, super chill.
So super chill. And what I would say is like the largest is a green anaconda that also get to be really long, like up to 29 feet. And they are also significantly heavier. They can weigh up to 176 pounds.
Well, yeah, because they're
They're
solid
yeah,
muscle, basically.
they're just a big muscle. I will
Yeah.
say, like, as I said at the beginning of the episode, I am generally cool with snakes. But looking at some of these real big snakes, I definitely had a little bit of like that primate, like, ooh, I don't know about that.
I don't know about that. Yeah,
I
that's
don't know about
valid.
that.
I think anything that could like feasibly swallow me whole, I'm
Yeah,
probably like pretty anti that
that's
as a
fair.
as a general
I feel
rule.
like that's a good line to
Yeah.
draw in your
Yeah.
life.
Yeah, right.
The smallest snake is the Barbados thread snake, which grows to around 4 inches long and is described as about as wide as a spaghetti noodle. So
Just a guy.
a true danger noodle, just a little
Yeah.
guy. And he's not dangerous. He just eats termites and ant larvae.
Oh, thanks for that, bud. Can you come
Thanks,
over to
little
my
guy.
house?
Right? Come
I
on up
got
from Barbados and
yeah,
hang
come on
out.
up and eat my termites. I would really appreciate that.
Yes. So thanks for my biology corner, zoology corner. But the fact that humans have this like very deep and primal connection with snakes, and the fact that almost every place that has people has snakes,
Mhm.
means that snakes play a major role in a huge variety of religions and mythologies around the world. Uh,
I can't think of any times that snakes have played a role in religion.
Well,
Interesting.
just wait, Midge. I'll tell you about it. So the serpent is often a symbol of death and rebirth. It makes sense because, first of all, a snake can kill you, so there's the death right there. And second, obviously, snakes shed their skin and are reborn as they leave their old skin behind. They've been used as a representation of evil in some cultures, fertility in others. This is so widespread that I was like, I can't even like give a survey of snake mythos around the world. So I will say that I, of course, as Midges, am personally familiar with the Christian depiction of
Right.
snakes in the Garden of Eden, which tempts Eve into tasting forbidden fruit of knowledge. This was like just kind of a vague part of my religious upbringing. I did almost get super sidetracked into Pentecostal snake handling, which
Oh,
I now am kind of like maybe I'll do an episode on that. So I won't talk about it too much right now. But safe to say, the Christians are not huge snake fans.
yeah, yeah,
Um, in Norse mythology, there's Jormungandr, the
of
serpent
course.
that was thrown into the sea, and it grew so big it encircled the earth and bit its own tail. So that Ouroboros is also a symbol that we see a lot. This kind of like cyclical nature of life that's in literature a lot. In
Tattooed
Greek,
on Dana Scully.
exactly. Most
Impor-
importantly,
Most importantly,
there is also spoiler an X-Files episode with snake handling
snake handling.
in
That was the first thing I thought of, and I was like, "Don't make this about X Files, Midge.
Yes.
Don't make it about X
Talking about the
Files."
X-Files, but it's coming. And in Greek mythology, there are definitely like monster snakes, but we also, of course, have Medusa, who was cursed with snakes for hair, the scariest thing that a lady could have. One of the most famous cultural events surrounding snakes is the snake dance that's performed by the Hopi people in Arizona, um, which is actually not a ritual about the snakes. It is like a ritual of thanks for the past year and asking for good fortune. And the snakes are actually like messengers to the spirit
Oh, that's
world.
cool.
So at least that is my understanding from what I've read. This ritual was really popular with tourists for a long time, to the point that they actually closed it and are like, randos, you can't watch this
You can't watch our
anymore.
snake dance. Yeah.
So there are like photos from definitely like early 20th century. Teddy Roosevelt famously saw the snake dance when he was out west, but that is no longer a public ritual. And of course, there are snakes in horror movies.
I
I feel like Anaconda
was
is
gonna say, are we gonna talk about
the
Anaconda?
most famous, featuring Jennifer Lopez and all sorts. Owen Wilson,
Yeah.
all sorts of folks are in this movie. And It is there I don't know. I don't find like monster snakes that scary, I guess.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just the CGI. I'm like, whatever. You're not a real snake.
You don't have what it takes.
You
No,
don't have
I
what it takes to eat me. You're just made of pixels.
No, I think I tend to love these, like, giant insert here monster
Yeah.
movie. 'Cause, like, yeah, they're not scary, but they're so fun. Like,
Yeah.
I love a big snake, a big spider, anything, but Anaconda's stupid in a good way, but it's
Yes.
stupid, yeah.
Yeah. It was an entertaining movie. I
Yeah,
feel
I've
like
never been like, "Oh my god, that scarred me."
no. Yeah, I feel like giant snake is definitely like the like man-eating snake is definitely the go-to for like horror. You do
Mhm.
occasionally see like a pit of like regular snakes. But I think that always like if a regular snake is going to be scary in a movie, there has to be like 100 of them.
That's I actually think volume of snakes is scarier than one big snake, in my
Yeah,
opinion. Like,
yeah.
I do get heaved anytime I see a swarm of anything.
Mhm.
Yeah, like a
Yes.
pit of vipers is a scary, like,
Yes.
situation to me for sure.
There's just so much wiggling.
Yeah. The most terrifying thing of all.
Yes,
Rampant
truly.
wiggling.
Just wild and rampant wiggling. They don't even care.
No.
They don't even care. And I just think that the duality of snakes in our like kind of symbolism and consciousness is really interesting. Because you have this juxtaposition of something that is like both enticing and also deadly. You definitely see snakes used for sexy purposes. I mean, you think about Britney
Mhm.
Spears
Mhm.
performing with a big old snake, and I I found this website. It's a subset of a site called California Herps, which herpetology is the study of snakes. If y'all didn't know, but they have this like delightfully in depth like movie archive where they're like, here are snakes that appeared in movies. Here are monster snakes. Here are snakes that died in movies. Here are sexy snakes in movies. And I respect them. Thank you for your work, California Herps. But there's just a lot of examples of like women dancing with snakes. Obviously,
Mhm.
that definitely calls back to this kind of Christian perspective of like temptation and sin.
I
Uh,
was gonna say a lot of sexy snakes. I feel like it goes back to some form of xenophobia somewhere. There's
yeah,
always
that's
like a
for sure
snake
too.
charmer or
Oh yes,
yes,
yes.
snake lady dancing.
Hmm.
Um,
And I mean, we did just talk about rampant wiggling, but I mean, like a slow, like single, like sinewy kind of wiggly can be
mhm.
sexy
Oh yeah,
if you're into that kind of thing.
but yeah, I think that a lot of these animals we've talked about, they do have that duality, which I think is what makes them so interesting.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, I think that people, I mean, obviously this is just kind of a theme about loving horror in general, that we are intrigued and in ways attracted to things that are frightening.
Mhm.
And oh no, I've made this episode a Pride Month episode again because maybe snakes are gay. So
Oh, like that's actually we should change the name of Ghouls Night to "Oh no, I've made it gay."
we honestly should. We really should. Man, I see, and now I'm like, I was too excited to tell you about snakes, and I went through them too fast. As I was preparing this, I was like, this feels like a middle school boys like science report that I'm just like, hey, can I tell you some stuff I learned about snakes?
That's literally what this whole podcast is. It's just us like
Uh,
manically info dumping.
it's true. Okay, since we have extra time, I'm going to tell you a fact about snakes that I cut, but that I thought was really cool.
Tell me all about
Um,
it.
which is that so we know that pretty much I think all snakes flick out their tongues to like taste and scent the air
Right.
around them. But pit vipers, so named because of the special pits they have in their face that let them like sense heat,
Mm.
and they actually, because in the same way that us having two eyes allows us to like have depth perception and like cross-reference things in our
Mhm.
brain, these pit vipers, with the way that their pits are set up in their face, can distinguish between like foreground and background
Oh,
things, and basically have like snake depth perception, like based on like heat,
heat.
which is
Interesting.
super cool and I
Like
thought was really interesting.
heat sonar. That's really cool.
Yeah, and so that's definitely a big part of how they do their hunting, and I think that that's kind of sexy. So there you go.
That's really
Maybe
cool.
I just think snakes are sexy.
I was having a thought of like, huh, that's kind of interesting as far as like the fear being more of a learned behavior. Because the first thing I thought of when you brought snakes to the table, my grandmother was horrified of snakes, like
Yeah.
so
People are
scared
so
of
scared
them.
of snakes, and I actually, so this was also something that I thought about and was like, "Well, I don't have time," but I have time.
But we
So
do.
people like I see so many people who like post their pet snakes on
Mhm.
Instagram, and it's filled with comments of people being like, I would kill that thing immediately if I saw it, which one awful thing to say about someone's
Someone's
pet. Why
pet,
would
yeah.
you ever do that? But I think does go to show just like how viscerally some people fear
Yeah.
snakes, and that's just not something that I relate to, because I do generally think they're pretty cool, like unless they're gonna eat me. But
Yeah. Well, and that's I was like, I guess it's interesting because I know, I guess it depends on your relationship. So people are probably like, well, it's your grandma. My grandma and I lived 5 houses away from each other. Like we were
yeah,
very, very close. So I was like, it's interesting that like I knew as a child that she was like really scared of them. And I never, but
yeah.
I always was like, they're cool.
Yeah.
uh, yeah, but that's funny. I wonder how many other people have like that first core memory of going to like a zoo trip and petting a snake, because that was as soon as you said snakes, I was like, "Oh, I
Yeah,
remember when I got to pet the snake and it was so smooth and cold and neat."
right? Yeah, and I mean, I presumably you also had this experience that lots of other kids were like,
Hell
"No,"
no, I'm not going to touch that
es
snake. Yeah.
especially the girls were like,
Mhm.
"No, they're not the snake," and I was like, touching that fucking snake.
We're not like other girls.
I'm
We
not
touch
like other girls,
snakes.
I love snakes. Oh man. All right. Well, that was a scattered one, but we'll wrap it up there. I was just in the mood to read about snakes this week.
Hey,
So
nothing wrong with that.
that is what we got. So if you are actually, come over and tell us on the Instagram if you're afraid of snakes or not, or if you think they're cool dudes. Um, you can find us on there at Ghouls Night in Pod, and that is also a place that you could send us a review. We don't have any right now, which is very tragic.
So sad.
But you could send us one there. You could leave one on Apple. You could leave a comment on Spotify. And all of those are great ways to let us know what you think of the show. And since we have extra time, I'll say that you can also pick up some Ghouls Night In merch if you
Heck
want
yeah.
to rep your Ghouls love in person. We've got our Crazy Victorians merch, which is so fabulous. I love wearing it, as well as our OG original illustrated merch, shirts and mugs and bags and stickers and just anything you could want. So you can find that at midgemonster.com/shop. And I also link it in our episode notes each week.
Get you some merch.
Get some merch. All right. So if you've already followed us at Ghouls Night in Pod and you want more of your lovely ghost hosts, you can find me at Penny Snark.
And you can find me all over the web at Midge Munster.
And until next time,
Good.
goodbye.
Bye.